Web3 gaming has a bit of a taboo around it, right? Typically, that term means that there's a bunch of NFTs stuck inside of video games, and are there going to be all these kind of crazy economics involved? I just want to play a video game. Blockchain just presents a more efficient way to do things that are currently done rather than trying to make the entire premise of your game dependent on token economy.
You're listening to Lights Camera Crypto, the podcast exploring all things entertainment and Web3. I'm your host, Stephen Ladden, and this week our guest is Rensa Games founder and CEO, Anthony Apollo. As a lifelong gamer, Anthony combined his love of games and his background in finance to form a Web3 gaming company that helps develop, distribute, and crowdfund, you guessed it, games. In our conversation, he explains the tech behind Rensa and shares his views on blockchain technology, game asset distribution, and the future of Web3 games. Let's dive in. Anthony, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Sure thing. Rensa Games you've created the company, you're the founder and CEO. Was gaming always forefront at your interest level as a kid growing up? Where did this interest and how the idea for Rensa start?
Yeah, absolutely. Like most people, I played the majority of the video games I have played growing up, specifically with my two brothers, who I co-founded Rensa Games with. And that was the status at the time, right? Weekends were spent in the basement playing Star Fox and GoldenEye and Zelda. And that was back in the day when you rent an N64 from Blockbuster. And at a certain point, your parents get so angry about how expensive that is, they just buy the damn thing eventually. But we were always passionate about gaming and have stayed passionate about it since then. Obviously, the gaming industry has changed quite significantly since the mid 90s, and we could certainly get into how that's happened and what that looks like, but it's something we've always been passionate about. I will say that we were certainly more passionate about gaming than where I started my career in accounting and advisory and consulting work. So I'm glad to see that things have gone on the trajectory they have over the last several years.
Right on. Okay, so early interest at which all those games you mentioned, Star Fox, GoldenEye, I think were pivotal 90s N64 experiences. How did you then take this love for gaming to the next level to form a company with your brothers?
Yeah, so I think we followed when we got into our adult lives, the time that we had free to spend playing video games was less and less. And then of course that coincided with games taking longer and longer to beat. There's no shortage of games that take 20 hours, 60 hours, 80 hours to play through. I think it somewhat came around by following the business side more than actually playing games, which is a little odd, but my background at the time was in finance, and it was just an easier way to stay on the pulse of what was happening, what was being built, how these companies were progressing as technology developed, and seeing the entire shift from here's a game for $60 to, well, this game is free to play, but we monetize it via microtransactions. And then seeing DLC as something that didn't exist, I'm sorry, downloadable content, right? Didn't exist back in the day. And then next thing you know, you had the Elder Scrolls Oblivion, you had horse armor. And that was like a big hubbub back then. But now, that's how a lot of games monetize the content that gets generated, microtransactions and all that. So it's been an interesting way to keep our attention on the industry while also doing other things. And then what we'll come around to in the immediate future is taking this kind of background that I had in finance and some other kind of creative endeavors, and then applying that to this technology that I was learning about in blockchain, and then putting it all together with a deep passion of mine, which is gaming.
Awesome. And so everything coalesces. You take your passion for gaming, your background in finance, put it in a pot, stir it up. Rensa Games comes out. And what is it? How does it work? How can people get involved?
Sure. The easiest way to think about what we're building at Rensa Games is functionally Roblox with the blockchain backend. Platforms like Roblox, and even now things like Fortnite through Fortnite Create, are all focused on what's called UGC, or user-generated content. Essentially, it means people are building stuff. It could be anything. When I say stuff, it could be music, it could be a player character that you're running around as. It's the players who are actually making all of this content, and it's being monetized inside games like Fortnite, Minecraft, Roblox. And what happens in those scenarios is that the people who are making the things don't get a significant portion of the money that is generated when people buy the things. And we are working on technology in blockchain that's really good at doing peer-to-peer transactions. So you have the financial recognition there. But what blockchain is also very good at is proving who is who and who's the owner of what. So in that capacity, it's also really good reputational recognition. And something we can get into kind of along the way here is certainly some high profile examples in the gaming industry when people don't quite get the credit that they should receive for building what they build. And someone like yourself who's got a background and you talk to all these musicians, I'm sure they've got plenty of similar stories, right? Where they've done this work and hasn't really netted out the way that it should have along the way. That is the kind of big picture of what we're building. What that looks like, because it is a very large, very long-term build, we just kind of break it down into three different pillars of what Rensa Games will be comprised of. One side of that is game and asset distribution. So if you think about platforms like Steam or the Epic Game Store on the gaming side, or the Unity Asset Store, Turbo Squids, and these other kind of asset stores, they all exist. Again, what they're not great at is instantaneous payments. What we've developed is a way for builders, again, whether that's a game developer or a content creator of a specific item, to upload and publish their work on the Rensa Games platform. It then lives in our marketplace. And when Steve comes along and buys a game that Anthony made, I'm not waiting 30 to 60 days to receive that money. I'm not trying to figure out if the amount that I'm getting paid by the third party who's doing all of the marketplace is giving me what I'm actually owed. It all happens on Rensa, real time, transparently, directly to your digital wallet. That's certainly a concept we can get into, but that is essentially the kind of baseline of what we wanted to build, right? We wanted people to get their money immediately and know where it came from and make sure that it could get split up amongst a team. Because another problem that's currently in the industry is that if you're a game developer and you sell some, well, if it lives on a platform like Steam, you are getting paid to one bank account, right? So if you get $100 and you got to wire it out to 5 people on your team, congratulations, you've just paid all your money to the bank. What we do is we've created a platform in which the creators can split up payments amongst any member of their team, any number of members of their team, based on their contributions to that particular game or even asset, right? So if you're selling a track of music and it's split between a drummer, a bassist, a guitarist, and a vocalist, if I buy that for $1, we could send 25% of that dollar to all of those people in real time. We don't have to worry about having to accrue royalties and having someone write you a check 4 months later. That all happens immediately.
So it's really just taking, as you're saying, taking the process that currently exists that's a little more, call it haphazard, and all right, we've got to pay all of these people that are associated with a particular project. You're literally taking from each sale and funds and distributing them to the maker, all of the participants that you would have to manually go through and send a percentage to. You're taking each sale and distributing it to everybody involved.
Exactly. And I think that is net where some of this blockchain stuff should net out. I know as we talk about blockchain and crypto and all this, people are focused on things like NFTs, people are focused on ICOs and this explosive growth. We see these numbers go up and Bored Apes and all this stuff. For me, blockchain should be a fairly boring tool for a good long time. It should be focused on creating massive efficiencies in cumbersome, like I said, haphazard processes, and just relying on peer-to-peer payment tech to accomplish that, rather than having a lot of people trying to touch your money before it ends up in your wallet or bank account or what it is. And if blockchain stayed that way for a while, I think people would be a lot happier with some of these trend lines that we see going up and down and cratering and then exploding and all that. It should be fairly boring tech, just make sure that people are getting what they deserve.
Totally. So you mentioned that's game asset distribution. What were the other two pillars of Rensa that are currently being developed?
Sure. So we talked about distribution. The other one is game development itself. And that'll be something that takes a much longer time to build out. But that's probably closest to the Roblox or Web3 kind of example here. And that's where we want to create an environment where people can actually drag and drop assets into a game world that other people have created and then utilize them, which again exists in a couple of different segmented places if you put things together. But when that happens in the way things traditionally work now, royalty streams are typically broken. It's like, I can get this asset off the shelf, pay you a couple bucks for it. And then if my game sells to your content and I sell 1 million copies, you don't see a dime of that, right? What we're trying to do is use blockchain technology to put what's called a token behind any kind of asset. And that token will specify things like licensing terms. Okay, how this asset can be used, how much do I need to pay up front, how much royalty is due on the back end, and automate all of that away. So if Steve, you put a piece of music on the Rensa Games asset marketplace, you can pick somewhere a continuum where pricing works for you. I want this much up front and nothing on the back end. I want this much on the back end. You don't need to pay me up front as a licensing fee. And then I, as a developer who wants to use your content, can come along anytime in the next day, week, 3 years later, and grab that piece of content, knowing that those terms are still structured on a blockchain, and say, okay, this price point works for me. Let me grab this off the shelf, put it inside my game, and when my game sells, again, the Rensa platform can automate distribution of payment directly to your digital wallet, even years later.
Wow. So do I have to use the rental marketplace in order to have my content be purchased according to those terms, or could that exist outside in a different world?
For now, it would probably live on Rensa for a while. The point of using this tech, however, is that everything should be nice and open. That's just a matter of time and build. There's a lot of talk about interoperability in this whole kind of game development space. When we start talking about metaverses, the big impediments to overcome is going to be interoperability. Do these blockchains work well together? Does this asset live in one particular video game engine like Unity, but you're building an Unreal, and how do we transfer that over? There are a lot of questions, and they're extremely technical questions that no one has really surmounted yet. There are a lot of very intelligent people working on these things. There is a lot of money on the line for who figures it out. Not saying it's going to be us necessarily, but I will say I think there is a lot of very smart people building and trying to figure that out as we speak. So that this should be something that is very open in the future.
Are there any particular titles or games specifically that are coming through that you're really excited about that you think are going to lead the charge or spearhead this whole vision that you have that's already starting to be implemented?
Yeah, so interesting question. I think from kind of like the super high fidelity stuff, I mean, you have to look at what Fortnite is doing with the Fortnite Creative Suite and what Unreal in general is doing with and their Unreal 5.2, which is the new engine they just announced at GDC a few weeks back. It's incredible stuff, but my focus is more getting away from that AAA development and seeing what's possible when people have access to more tools where or more access to assets even. And I think people are going to see a lot of Web3 games, and your listeners won't see me doing the air quotes on that, but Web3 gaming has a bit of a taboo around it, right? Typically, that term means that there's a bunch of NFTs stuck inside of video games, and are there going to be all these kind of crazy economics involved? I just want to play a video game. I think the community has really heard that feedback, and there's games that I'm really looking forward to, like Metalcore, which is kind of just like a big robot fighting game that looks great, and like all this blockchain stuff is an option if you want to interact with it. It's not the entire game is not predicated on you having tokens in your wallet. It's not predicated on microtransactions. If you want to do trade mech parts, that's there. But if you want to just put a robot together and start blasting people, you can do that too. And I think that's the way this needs to go, where it is again, blockchain just presents a more efficient way to do things that are currently done rather than trying to make the entire premise of your game dependent on like a token economy. And that's something that you'll hear a lot as you have these conversations is, well, we got to figure out the tokenomics of this game. And my take is I have a finance background. Most world governments can't figure out their own finances. I don't think you're going to figure it out inside of like a video game that crosses borders and has more people in it than countries and possibly more money going through than the GDP of many countries. So that's a net on that. But I will say, I'll put a bow on it and say this: the people who've been building, again, blockchain games have been at it for a while now. And while there was this kind of lull over the last year to 18 months of what's coming out now, especially at GDC recently, we're starting to see the games that people have been working on really hitting their stride, getting their alphas out there, getting their betas out there. And a lot of that's going to be launching soon. And the community will dictate whether this is going to stick around.
Sure. And speaking of community, do you think that a lot of what blockchain has to offer, aside from the enhanced streamlining of asset payments and divvying up of a sale to the creators and stuff like that, is the element of building that community really where blockchain comes into play, so that if you are a fan of a game and you're really enjoying it, blockchain helps you perhaps engage with the game in a way that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do. And is community building more of the and participating in community engagement more of the asset that people might be striving for here with these upcoming games?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think blockchain is a fantastic way to do things like loyalty models as well. Back in my day, when I started working in this space, early 2017, and even a little bit before that, just from a kind of learning perspective, the example everyone used was like airline points. Wouldn't it be great if airline points were on a blockchain? You could trade those and sell those to people. I'm like, yeah, that would be cool. Again, another example where it would simply be more efficient to use a blockchain to do something that already gets done. But the way I think about it is almost more like a marketing tool in a pseudo anonymous world. And that's already like a lot of jargon there, right? What that means is let's go back to the airline example, right? If I'm running a hotel in Hawaii and I want to give some kind of discounts to Delta flyers, right? Because there's a route out there. How do I do that now? I have to call Delta up. I got to figure out a marketing deal. I got to advertise it on a site, hope someone sees it, make sure it gets presented when someone's looking at different flights, different destinations, work with Chase and the Sapphire program and rewards programs and all this, and do it all manually. But if I was able to query a blockchain and you had, let's say, a tokenized ticket for your flight. I don't need to know who you are. I don't need to know when and where you're flying, but I could just see that this digital wallet has a ticket in it going to and from Hawaii. I could just do what's called an airdrop and send you a token that gives you some kind of benefit for when you're at my hotel. And you can see that in your wallet and say, oh, if I go here, I get 10% off. And then I go there and redeem it and the token gets burned. And then you can't use it again and again. So you don't have these kind of issues with someone spending the same $5 over and over. But again, this is a way people are starting to think about marketing in general. And that's, again, the kind of version now cut of this. Where this is all going, I think, is just it's going to be a way to aggregate larger and larger fan bases based around, let's call them complementary goods. So, for example, if I am a fan of, let's say, which is Avenged Sevenfold, right? They just had a concert ticket sale through Ticketmaster that allowed their fans who held a Avenged Sevenfold NFT to purchase tickets ahead of time before the bots slammed the website like they did during the Taylor Swift ticket sale. So it's essentially an accreditation that allows you to get access to this and not have to deal with a 3x price gouge due to bots. Then if I was building a video game that had that like punk rock Hunter S. Thompson aesthetic to it, if I think that the Avenged Sevenfold community could be a kind of part of a core demographic that I should be reaching, I could just mint a copy of my game, like an early access version, maybe not the full thing, and just airdrop everyone holding an Avenged Sevenfold token a copy of that early access demo. And they can say, oh, hey, I didn't know this was a thing, but now I have something to go and play over the weekend. And maybe I become a customer of that game publisher, game developer later on, because they're building something that I didn't know about it, but now it's here in my wallet. I already own it. I can do whatever I want with it. And now I'm converted. So that's where I think this will go over time.
Fascinating. And maybe just to pivot back to Rensa Games specifically, is there a different way in which a creator gets involved with the platform versus a player collector?
Yeah, so for us, we're focused on developers right now. For us, when you build these kind of multi-sided marketplaces, it's always like a chicken and egg thing, no matter where you start. So for us to have players and community on the platform, there needs to be content. To have content, we need to approach developers about getting their stuff on Rensa Games and hosting it in our marketplace. We don't require anything like exclusivity. We're not trying to pay people to be like, you're only going to put your stuff here and nowhere else. We're a small startup. We don't have the funding to do that. And if anyone's curious what those economics look like, I implore you to check out the Apple versus Epic lawsuit and see how much Epic Games spends for exclusivity on some of their games. For us, it's more just about trying to get developers spun up in this Web3 world. And what does that mean? It means getting them set up with a digital wallet. It means getting them to understand that they can get paid extremely fast using this technology. Because even when developers have heard that, unless they see it and can touch it. And touch is, again, a kind of speculative word. Basically, we're talking about digital money and assets. But once they see it live and in use, it's always a wow moment for them. And I was going to say something else, but I don't know if I was allowed to use profanity on this podcast, so I'll
100%.
hold off. Okay, yeah, it's like the holy shit moment, right? The way it works is typically we need to do a little bit of convincing that you can put your game on this platform and you can get paid for it in real time. They're like, I get paid over here. I'm like, yeah, but you're waiting months and you got to trip over X amount of dollars. Let's get on our staging website and just see how long it takes you to upload this game and see how long it takes you to get paid. And if they've got a finished game that could run in a browser, right? So you're on Chrome and then you could go to Rensa Games, just start playing something. We've had people who are able to upload a game and sell a copy of it and get paid in less than 10 minutes. And for
Wow.
them, that's transformational. Even before that, step one is we need to get you set up with a digital wallet. Okay, our platform uses a digital wallet called MetaMask, which is pretty common in the blockchain space, pretty robustly audited and tested and all that. So I'll just tell them, look, the first thing you want to do is just download this wallet. You're going to need to write down the secret code. Don't share your screen. Don't tell me any of this. Don't tell anyone. Don't tell your partner, your family, whatever. Don't say anything to anyone. Just keep it secret, keep it safe. But once I get past that, send me this weird like hexadecimal thing, 0x A12G. Send me a copy of that. That's a public address, right? That's what anyone can use to send you stuff. Give me that real quick. And by the time they put that in the chat and I could send them like one token on the Polygon blockchain, they haven't even finished asking a question of what is this? And they're like, oh, it's weird. I open this up and I've already got something in here. I'm like, yeah, I sent it to you already. I already sent you money. I'm like, it's $1 or whatever it happens to be. Then that's the holy shit moment for them. Oh, wow, this really does work that fast. And yes, you can get paid in seconds and it's all transparent. Maybe getting a little deeper into the way the platform works now, I'll do the high level first, then we can get into the weeds, is when a game sells on our platform or an asset sells on our platform, the money that I might pay for Steve's game is going to go right to you. And that once that transaction happens, you'll get a link to see this transaction on a blockchain. And you can see that if you divided up this payment with your team, you can see every discrete piece of that broader payment going to each digital wallet. So you know you're getting paid exactly what you're supposed to get. You don't need to worry about trying to audit one of the largest game publishers and digital asset resellers on the planet because they're not going to tell you anything. For us, just that that level of transparency is the baseline.
And so essentially it's making payments faster, but also showing developers, hey, here, there's no guesswork here. You are able to understand the economics of what you're putting out there in terms of your games. You're able to see in real time how that's playing out, and you're able to have the results, as you're saying, show up in your account. And there's no when's is 14 days, 15. It's instantaneous, which is really cool. To that end, how is a payment triggered? Is it by play? Is it by download? Is it by purchase? What's the metric there?
Yeah, everything we do is by purchase. It's wild, right? No, there's no SaaS model and it's not free to play and monetize it later. It's just if you want to play a game or you want to buy a track of music, you buy it. Like iTunes, when it worked 15 years ago, you could buy a track of music for $1.99 or whatever it was when I was in
Right,
college.
right.
Yeah, it's that simple, right? When the way, and then I guess we could probably, this is probably the juncture to get into the structure here. So, Steve, you're building a game, right? You want to upload that game to the Rensa platform. Cool. You create what's called a studio, which is our convention on chain to establish your entity. And that could be one person, it could be a bunch of people. You have admins, you have members. Again, a way to recognize everybody in that creative flow. Then you upload your game to our platform, give it a name, a description, some metadata, which is always important because that is something that is closed off on mostly larger platforms. You don't know how much is selling. You don't know what categories and tags these things have. Again, we make that all public. It's all on chain, so anyone can query that at any time. And then we let you do two blockchainy things with your game. One is we let you list the number of game license tokens or asset license tokens that will live in our marketplace. That's the number of things that can be purchased. So the analogy there is, again, Steam keys, right? You have X amount of keys. You could set a couple around to your friends, and a bunch of them will live on the marketplace, etc. If you wanted to create a very scarce game, you can do that. You could have 10 copies of it. If you wanted everyone on planet Earth to play your game, you can make 10 billion. It doesn't matter to us, doesn't matter to the blockchain, it just matters to you as a developer and what you want to do. More importantly than that for us is what happens at the end of this kind of process, which is you can name whatever price you want to put on your game or asset, and then you're then able to enter what's called the public addresses of every one of your collaborators or co-creators. And again, that's 0x ABC, 0x123, just alphanumeric nonsense. But it's who you are on a blockchain. And then what we also let you do is next to that public address, you specify the percentage of every sale that's due to that particular creator. So if Ben did the story for Steve's game, he might get 5%. You take Ben's public address, stick it there, 5%. If someone did a couple of Foley sound effects, they're going to get half a point, right? But their public address, 0.5. And it's really that simple. Then you hit publish on our platform. We spin your game up on our back end. We mint the tokens that represent, we'll send you one that represents your ownership of the game. We call that the game owner token that allows you to do different functionality like these airdrops we're talking about. And then we mint those 10 to 10 billion license tokens that you wanted to create. Those will go live in our marketplace. Then Anthony comes along. I want to buy Steve's game. I go to Rent Games Marketplace. I go to Steve's game and I click purchase. I could do that in crypto. I could do that in fiat based on integrations we have. So if you don't want to deal with a wallet and having 0.02 Matic in your wallet, you can just use a credit card. And then our backend will do all the magic. But when that purchase is made, either in crypto or in fiat, when I purchase that token, that's when all of that funding starts to flow out of my wallet or out of the kind of the backend wallets that we use to your wallet as a creator, Steve's public address. And then Ben will get his 5%, and that Foley SFX creator will get their 0.5%. And it's all direct, all wallet to wallet. There's no one in the middle touching the money. It's all on a blockchain. You can see this all happening in real time. I am repeating myself. I know that. But when people see this stuff happening, again, that's the oh shit moment for them because they haven't understood that this is possible. A lot of people have heard that blockchain is bad for the environment and everything is a scam, and that latter part is only like 98% true. I kid, but do your own research. Be aware out there that there are some bad actors. But the point is, this stuff works. It just takes teams putting all the different pieces together to make it happen.
Wow. So then it sounds like scarcity of a game could be, just to go back to one nugget you mentioned, could be determined by the developer. Is there a benefit aside from just having a quote unquote rare game to having 10 copies of it available? Because it sounds like then it's not where I could go to GameStop and buy the upcoming Zelda for any particular, there's not an unlimited supply of any particular game. It sounds like, what's available is available, and that's when it's gone, it's gone.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up Zelda as the example because going back to my mid 90s, right?
Yeah, only mid 90s game references can we use in this conversation.
Exactly. If you remember correctly, or you were a N64 gamer, not a PS1 kid, the cartridge, the N64 cartridge for Zelda Ocarina of Time, there was a gold edition of it. Now, I
Yes.
was fortunate enough that I was able to get the gold edition.
Oh, same.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, but that's where that comes out, right? You can do limited editions. Maybe the first 100 people to buy this game will get the gold edition, and then the people are going to get their kind of like mat grade cartridge down the road. And we actually have that on our platform. People are allowed to make their own cartridges. Right now, we just let the devs pick what they want to do. But in the future, like that might be a way to create like an unlock system, right? Okay, if this is your third game on the platform, you can unlock these color schemas and textures and all this stuff. And you don't want to like overly overgate too much of that aesthetic stuff, in my opinion. But the point stands, right? You can use it as a way to incentivize developers to put more on the platform. And then they can have like multiple different special edition, which is another kind of checkbox. Yeah, this is a special edition of something. And again, that's familiar it's familiar to the NFT markets. It's familiar to the way things are done now with limited collections and limited supply stuff. I would want to go back to the kind of like the marketing example, right, that we just were talking about, where maybe I mint 1,000 versions of this game that has this particular cover art or whatever it is, and I'm going to airdrop those or only make them accessible to the people who have those Avenged Sevenfold NFTs in their wallet. And that's like another way to start building up this branding engine, this marketing engine to bring all these communities together. I care a lot more about that in terms of the scarcity element than just like, oh, this is rare because it's rare.
So then it sounds like too, which is really cool, then these developer incentives are really to continue their engagement on Rensa Games, but also gives them the opportunity to create their gold Ocarina of Time and have that basically be digitized in this new world of gaming.
Absolutely. That's exactly it. And I think people, we see this on Steam like a little bit with early access, but once we start getting into more of the community stuff and crowdfunding, which is kind of that third pillar which we haven't talked about yet, we can certainly get there. But people will understand like how long the creative process takes in gaming. For example, something might start as a game that's created in a weekend during a game jam, which is something else that we do on our platform. We have a game jam function called Showcase. We could certainly get into that as well, but maybe that's V1 of the game. Okay, who has V1 and who's supporting me way back when? Okay, then maybe I'll airdrop them an early access version of the game, which is again analogous to the way things work on Steam other platforms now, where you could pay a smaller amount of money to get access to this game while it's still in development. So you're gonna have to deal with all the bugs and everything, but you've already bought it and you'll get the full version when it's done. Maybe that's 6 months from now, maybe it's 7 years from now. You don't really know. But hey, I support a developer and I've got access to play this thing. And then there could be a version down the line, which is the final version, and like the director's cut version, like Kojima did with Death Stranding. There's all these kind of iterations that you can engage with your community and your customers during. And I think that's a lot of where this stuff is going to go. Instead of like artificial scarcity, it's going to be recognition of people who supported me earlier on.
So there's also a way to, as we were talking about with that community engagement, give close the feedback loop and give support to your supporters.
Exactly. You return the favor.
Yeah.
That's going to it'll strengthen the loop, and that becomes a virtuous cycle.
And is it something then that if I'm the holder of one of these tokens, can then if say I'm approached by another super fan of a particular game, is it something that I can then give to him or her, or make it so that can continue to be cycled into the community and on the platform?
Exactly it. So that's like the GameStop problem, right? Like physical games get created, someone plays them, they sell them to games, they sell a $60 game to GameStop for $4, and then GameStop sells that game that they just paid you $4 for $30, and the original developer sees none of that. And that's something that having everything on a blockchain with tokens that unlock games can fix. That does get into the kind of the question around royalties and how you can preserve those. That has not been an easy thing to solve, although that caveat itself has two different branches. What we want to do is make sure that if Steve takes that game and then resells it, then we're preserving the payments back to the original developers and all those creators therein, which is something that's going to take a little bit of engineering to accomplish. There are people who've been knocking on that door to do it at the token or the smart contract level, which is again all blockchain parlance there, but try to make it royalties are locked in forever. There's a different branch of this kind of conundrum where if you've been following dialogue about NFT platforms like OpenSea or Blur, the question becomes what royalties are given back to the original artists that are creating the pieces of music or art or just JPEGs that live on these platforms. And then, so what's happened is on Ethereum, for example, not to get too much of the technical weeds of it, on Ethereum, people have created a code, we'll call it a chunk of code that is able to preserve royalties, but it only works across the NFT exchanges that all agree that, hey, we're going to enforce this. The second you take that NFT off an exchange that enforces it and puts on one that does not, that royalty is gone. And then you compound that problem with the fact that these NFT exchanges are all kind of in a race to the bottom for who can preserve the most payouts for the people who are flipping these things on a day-to-day basis because that's their core customer. So the first kind of, I guess, person to fall when that happens is the original creator of that piece of content because their royalties get slashed. They bring it off the holders of an NFT, bring that NFT off a platform that preserves the royalty, or that platform itself slashes the royalties down and tries to give as much of that kind of secondary sale money to the flippers because that's the core customer. That's a whole different version of that problem.
Sure. And what's interesting about what you're saying too, if you think of it in terms of art, it sounds like you guys are just taking what is being done in the art world, in NFT art at least, and applying the same strategy whereby the artist ideally gets paid out every time the NFT is flipped. You're just taking that same concept and applying it to a game.
Exactly, exactly. We're trying to do it at a much, I'll call it a higher level of granularity than what currently happens as well, and just trying to preserve it over time so that we don't need to worry about things like bringing a token off of the Rensa Games site and putting it on a different marketplace and reselling it there.
So would the idea be that most people stay in the Rensa ecosystem and it helps you become synonymous with, hey, if I have a game on Rensa, then I know that from the creative back end, my team is going to be pretty much taken care of fairly. And then when that game, if is ever flipped secondhand, that team is also going to be taken care of in that scenario as well.
Exactly. And I think that's where things will go. Will live for quite some time, near term into kind of medium term. Long term, if this becomes like a whole open system and everything is blockchainified, then hopefully it is take this and go wherever you want and still preserve that royalty to the teams. The technology just isn't there yet, to be candid.
In terms of, you mentioned game jam. What is it? How do developers get involved? And it sounds pretty fascinating. If I'm creating a game in a weekend, that seems, one, pretty implausible, but two, if it exists, then how does it work? Perhaps provide a little more detail around that.
Yeah, absolutely. I always forget that game jam is not a term that everyone knows. That's I've at least tried to explain away a lot of the blockchain stuff. Game jam is simply a hackathon for building games. And if you're not familiar with the hackathon, it's just a period of time in which a individual or a team is tasked with building a product or code base or a game or a film, if you think about like film fests, or music if it's a jam session, in a finite period of time. And in the case of game jams or hackathons, particularly around one specific prompt. So the way that these things typically work is you can go on a platform like itch.io, which is also a browser-based site that has lots of independently developed games, about 730,000 of them. If people are curious about the scope of this stuff, this is not just like a bunch of people in their basements, I'm going to make a game. There's millions of people doing this. In a game jam scenario, a group will come together, someone will put a prompt out there. Hey, over this long weekend, I am tasking the community to build games around, build the best first person shooter you can over 4 days. And the prize on the line is going to be $100 or $1,000, or maybe it's a piece of software or like a mechanical keyboard. There could be all kinds of different prizes for this stuff. And then you have people contribute, they tag in, they sign their team up, the teams build around whatever that prompt is, they submit their content. Some judges vote on which of these submissions are the best. You get your rank order, and then ta-da, you have a winner at the end of that time period. And it's great. It's a great way for people to experiment with different types of game loops, right? I give the example of a first-person shooter that's vanilla. You could create all kinds of weird prompts. They could be very philosophical. They could be very mechanical. Okay, make a game where time stops when you stop moving, right? Like those kind of examples. And it's very broad. But the issue that we've had in the past, just speaking on behalf of my team specifically, is in these scenarios like game jams or like hackathons where you're building code instead of a game, or even a pitch competition where I'm trying to present Rensa games and there's some amount of money on the line. We've been screwed out of winnings a bunch of times. Our team won a $25,000 pitch competition back in September of 2021. Money never showed up. Won a $3,000 hackathon. Money never showed up. We actually put $1,000 on the line for a hackathon at one point, and the organizers failed to pay that out for 3 months. And people were coming to us like, hey, you guys are legit because we never got this money. I'm like, we said that's like a 501c3 charity, all right? Go talk to them. So rather than complaining about it, we decided we wanted to build a solution, which again, at the end of it, we'll get back into that exact same marketing flow we were talking about, just kind of cue that up. But what we've built is a platform called Showcase. And Showcase is our way of automating game jams, hackathons, pitch competitions, film fest, jam sessions, whatever. We do it on a blockchain, a consistent narrative thread here, right? So the way that works is step one is money. If you're saying money's on the line, money has to be there. So the first step is a sponsor of whatever this challenge is going to be needs to fund a prize pool with Matic if it's on Polygon, ETH if it's on Ethereum, just some amount of crypto and or fiat, stablecoins, whatever. That lives in a prize pool, which is technically a escrow contract on a blockchain. So no one can touch it. Everyone can see that the money is there. It's public, but no one can move it until the end of this game jam. And at that point, no one's touching it then either. What we do is we use smart contracts to send it out to the winners. So sponsor comes in, they put the money in the pot. Teams sign up and say, I want to build in this challenge. So they, again, similar to the distribution we talked about before for games and assets, they will go ahead and put their public addresses for themselves and their teams and the percentage that everyone's contributing. Same kind of rails there. They'll put that all into their kind of registration flow. Then when their game is done, when their movie is filmed, when the code base is created for a hackathon, they submit that through our portal. It's kind of like a long form that they could do. And then we end that submission period, and then you're not able to submit things on chain anymore because smart contracts, the blockchain doesn't allow it. At that point, the judges take over. Judges, same thing, register their public address. That allows them to access the content. It allows them to vote, which they just click on whichever one they like the most and say, I want to vote for this one. And then all those votes are tabulated on chain. Again, it's public. Everyone can see who voted and who the winners are. So there's no chicanery behind the scenes. There's no like backroom deals. Like it's all extremely public. And then when the voting period ends, no one can really do anything anymore. There's just one big shiny button that says end challenge. And once that button is clicked, essentially our smart contracts, very similar to the way that the games work, will distribute all the payouts immediately. So if there's one ETH on the line and first place gets 50%, second gets 30, third gets 20, that first place prize of 0.5 ETH will go to the winning team. And if that team had 4 people on it, all getting 25%, we'll split it up. Okay, first place gets 0.5, split by 25% to each wallet. It's done. There's no wondering about when this money is coming through, who needs to hit the buttons, what forms need to fill out. We certainly handle the legalese kind of off chain for now, but again, it's just a very simple way of proving that something is actually on the line and getting it sent out to people. So to give you an example quickly about the most recent one we just did, we partnered up with an organization called Game 7 DAO. They are a decentralized autonomous organization, hence DAO, that has quite a bit of budget from BitDAO and Forte, and their remit is expanding this whole Web3 gaming ecosystem. So we partnered up with them to create a series of challenges within the confines of a game jam. We had, I think, 18 teams and 27 people across those 18 teams, like all register and submit content that was voted on by judges, and then you have your winners at the end of it. Interestingly, a lot of the people who submitted content were like more Web 2 games, but trying to learn about Web 3 through this vehicle, which I think is incredible because we want to get more people in this space, and that's certainly a way to do it. And then long term, we want this to be like a marketing tool, right? Where companies that are working on games, whether that's bigger companies or smaller independent developers, can take a couple of the assets that they've got in flight and say, okay, here's a character. Like you can download it from the Rensa Games asset store, maybe pay us a couple bucks for it, and then build with it in a game jam. We'll put some money on the line and have that there. And then when the game jam is done, you now have completed games that could go live in the Rensa Games marketplace and be sold again. And now you're like doubly monetizing a marketing asset, should you want to. If you want to just do it for free, you can certainly do it for free. And that's just part of your marketing budget. But the point is we're trying to create this, we talked about this earlier, this kind of virtuous cycle, this closed loop where you're incentivizing people to create content that lives in a marketplace that people can buy to put a game jam on the line and build games. And then you keep going around the circle, and that's how you build that content base up.
So it's also utilizing the content that's on Rensa Games to be put into Rensa Games to then continue to develop and iterate and have these new products with the existing products, which is pretty neat. Question on the game jam is the public address that's used as the holder of the prize distribution. Is there a way, do you guys mention that ahead of time and say, hey, this address is going to have this amount of money? Because conceivably I could just pick a random address and say, hey, look, this has this much money in it and that's what's going to you guys, and not have that be the case.
Yeah, we glue it all together on our back end and present it to you, the customer, as it were, on our front end. So when you go into our site, there's showcase, you can see game 7, you can click into the challenges, and each individual challenge will have a link that says prize pool. And right now, if you went there for the game 7 challenge, it would say 0 because that money has already been distributed. But if you click on it, you'll see the smart contract specifically of it that's been deployed by game 7, the money that came in from game 7. You can see the code of the escrow contract, so you know that no one can touch it. Yeah, and it's all linked and automatically deployed. It's actually kind of a funny story, not to get too into the backgrounds of how it all came about, but their team, they were lining up their entire like engineering team to be like, how are we going to deploy this? We need to carve out like how many hours? And I'm like, I don't think we really need to carve out that much time. And it was this mismatch of them thinking like they were gonna have to like interact with the blockchain directly and go through this like really cumbersome like effort. And no, just come to the website, hit these three buttons, and like it's done. And yeah, they got everything deployed within 30 minutes of a 2 hour call that we had set up. And oh, it's already done. Okay, cool. That was easy. And that's the point. We're trying to put more and more of this blockchain stuff in the background so these tools do become more accessible. We've created developer documents that kind of walkthroughs of how everyone can do this stuff themselves. Obviously, we need to have a little bit of manual interaction on the front to make sure we're not dealing with criminals or anyone who wants to put up whatever, like on OpenSea. So we try to avoid that. But yeah, we do really want to make it all self-service because, and this is one of the, as we wind down here, one of the stats I want to throw out is there are 3 billion people on this planet that consider themselves gamers. And yeah, that's everyone from your esports League of Legends players to your mom playing Candy Crush on her morning commute. But there's a lot of people who are playing video games. However, there is about 500,000 to 700,000 active Ethereum wallets on a daily basis. And a lot of that is probably wash trading in these NFT markets. So it's not that many people who are spending days living on a blockchain interacting with all the time. So we have to put more of the stuff in the background and make these tools look a lot more familiar and feel a lot more familiar to what people are used to. And that is a big part of what we are trying to do while still embracing all the new functionality and the efficiencies this technology creates.
So what no code has done for the coding demographics, you guys want to do that with blockchain, but have that sort of run in the background as you're saying. And technically you shouldn't be able to tell a difference between, to use that example, a no code curated platform versus traditional code.
Absolutely. And going back to that early example of Roblox for Web3, that's exactly how that would manifest, right? You put all this stuff in the background and you don't even know it's there. But because it is there, we're able to preserve payments directly from peer to peer, much more easy, efficiently, and transparently.
Cool. What can we expect from Rensa Games in the coming months?
Good question. It's a startup. We could wind this call down in 2 hours from now. It could look completely different, but I kid. We've been going in this direction for a while, just really trying to make sure that we are preserving the financial and reputational recognition for creators, as we talked about. That's always been my remit in the blockchain space, even going back to when I started, which was a decentralized, fan-owned science fiction franchise called Solarius. That's with the CEL. You can Google that one. But for now, we are focused on kind of our go-to-market, right? So trying to get those independent developers on board as the volume play, but we're also pursuing several enterprise clients to use our platform and Game Jam specifically as a way to revive old intellectual property that has gone touched in a while, which is very exciting. I also want to see this thing out there and live going across verticals because we can support music. We do have a music player on our platform. We can use it for as a comic book reader. We have all this tech, and there are some very intriguing conversations going on behind the scenes about that, which I can't really share too much about, but stay tuned. And then what I would turn everyone's eye to, because it is the most recent big public announcement we've had, is that we have partnered with a company called Lamina One. Lamina One is there's a lot of things. First, it is a blockchain. It is a proprietary fork of the Avalanche blockchain, and it is being essentially purpose suited to create what's called the open metaverse, which is a creator focused version of a metaverse. And most importantly, not to bury the lead on this, is it's being created by Neil Stephenson, who is the author of Snow Crash, who created the term metaverse in that book about 30 years ago. And we are one of 11 early access partners that the Lamina One team has elected to work with. They're quite flattered by that. Yeah, I think they recognize we've been building in this space, being creator focused for 6 years now. And we are really looking forward to working with that whole community. The community there is incredible. It started out as a couple hundred people when they announced this thing last year. I think there's 35,000 people in their Discord right now. They had to stop letting people set up nodes because there was too many people like all slamming the test net at once as they're trying to get this thing launched. I'm very excited about that. Everyone we've met through that program is absolutely incredible. And we're looking forward to the more public revelations about that platform in the near future.
Very cool. And also, you bring up a good point with the technology that you guys are developing. I could definitely see it being transferable to a bunch of other industries and other platforms as well. So it's something that it solves a problem that's bigger than just games, kind of what you were alluding to with music and stuff like that. So it should be interesting to see how that is adopted in both of those fields, but also potentially in some other ones that we haven't discussed as well.
Yeah, this stuff will develop over time. Someone will come up with an idea that we never even thought of ourselves, and that's why it's important to be building in this open space where people can see what we're doing and say, "Hey, can I take this part of your code and do this over here?" And the answer is probably going to be, "Yeah, go for it." Let us know how it goes. Let us know how we can help.
Cool. Anthony, how can people find out more about Rensa Games? How can they find out more about you? How can they interact with you guys and become part of the community?
Sure, we are certainly a bit of a quiet team for now because we've been so focused on the build, but things will start getting a little louder. Our kind of day-to-day comms is in Discord, so you can find us there. And then, of course, just go to Rensa.games. Check out what we've got. For now, you'll see some like demo games we created, a couple of things we've spun up. But if you are interested in really listing any kind of digital asset on the platform, just reach out to us on Twitter. It's Rensa_app. We are happy to accommodate anybody. And we could also kind of power your platform with our tech stack. So if you are a musician, you want to host some stuff on your platform, your own website, and have this digital asset efficiency, but you don't want to send everybody to Rensa.games, we've got something called Powered by Rensa. You put 2 lines of code into your website, you're running Rensa games in an iframe on your site. It looks like yours, it feels like yours, but we've done all of the blockchain nitty gritty for you. So please do not hesitate to reach out. We are excited to work with creators that want to support themselves and just build together.
Awesome. Anthony, really appreciate the time. Thank you for the insights and really excited to see what you and Rensa Games have coming up.
Thank you, Steve. We appreciate the time.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Lights, Camera, Crypto, a podcast produced by Matt Bogart and Decential Media. Music by Brian Duncan and Kareem Imes. If you enjoyed this experience, be sure to rate and subscribe to our show and to follow @Sladden and @Decential Media for additional content.